BFA from Buffalo State College and an MFA from the City College of New York. And he's also founder and director of a nonprofit organization called Enclave Arts Alliance. Dario, hello. Hi. You'll have to unmute so we can hear you. Yeah.
My mistake. Thank you so much for the introduction, Naomi.
Yeah, take it away.
I also want to say thank you once again to Naomi and also to Hang for providing this opportunity for us. In a lot of ways, you've inspired me. Hang, you inspired me specifically for my art practice to create an LLC for it. And also, both of you have inspired me in some ways that I am reframing and rethinking the nonprofit Enclave Arts Alliance, which I'm the founder and executive director of. So just in a lot of senses, I really appreciate your feedback to me throughout this fellowship, and I am excited to potentially continue working with you both down the road. But for now, I will speak a little bit about my artwork. This is the beginning of a series called the Cookout. The Cookout was inspired by, it was just by thinking about Black spaces, and just like during quarantine and COVID, everything that's been happening politically and socially with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests, I've been thinking about just in what ways can I use assemblage and objects and, you know, sort of interpret them in different ways symbolically and juxtapose them together to form like a larger impression or interpretation of the times that are happening that we're facing right now. So this was one of the pieces. This is called the grill. This was made up of a wheel that's just been sitting down the block from me. There's just this giant wheel just there. And also just, I think I found that the bumper about 2 blocks away as well. So I found the bumper, I dragged it over to the wheel, and I also had these bike tires that I had assembled for a previous piece. And when I put it all together, I felt like it just really brought home what I wanted to create with this particular piece. I've been staring at that wheel for about a year, and I was trying to figure out some way to be able to create something from it. So I was glad that during this this quarantine time, I managed to kind of pull it together. So that is one piece that is a part of the series titled The Cookout. You can go to the next slide. This is another piece that's a part of that series. This was actually created in my backyard. I used my grill and also some other assemblaged pieces. These are actually a couple fabric sculptures that I created out of some clothing. One of them is a denim jacket. Another one's a leather jacket that I had painted and used for a different painting, a different series, and then I repurposed for this particular piece. In a lot of ways, this work represents my process in general. I like to create artwork, and then after I take it apart, I'll put it away in my shed, and then maybe months, years later, I'll find another purpose for it. I'll take that work and I'll recycle it or reuse it for a new piece of work. So that's what happened with this piece. This piece is called The Barbecue. And in a lot of ways, once again, I was drawing from the racial tensions of today and my perspective on it. And I also was influenced by just the environment, being forced to use my backyard as my studio. I was very influenced by the foliage and other things around. So that also played a part in the aesthetics of the piece. You can go on to the next slide. So similar to the last piece that you just saw, this is actually an entirely different series called Bloodline. But this was, I think, a continuation in the sense that I was inspired by the outdoors. I think being trapped inside for the first like 4 or 5 months of quarantine and really not leaving my house at all, I was really inspired when I got the chance to have a space again. This is actually from a residency that I have on Governor's Island, where there's nobody on the entire island pretty much, so it's safe to be there. But like once I received that residency and I knew that I had a space beyond my apartment to be able to create, I really wanted to go there and just bring as much green into that white space as possible. And I actually repurposed a painting that I created earlier this year to use for this series titled, the series is called Bloodline. This piece is called Genesis. And in a lot of ways, I'm drawing from my ancestry. You know, I sort of created a creation myth with this. It kind of in some ways metaphorically reflects how I believe, you know, like where humanity came from. We were all, you know, obviously we all came from Africa, but also sort of a science fiction take on where humanity is going. So this is the first piece of that series, and it's a 6-piece series, and it just progresses through the history of what happens in this myth that I created through visual art. You can go on to the next piece. This is another piece in that series. This is actually about 3 pieces in, actually 4 pieces in. And as you can see at this point, there isn't any painted, there is a painted aspect to it, but it's inside the fireplace. And you have to really stick your head in to see it. But for the most part, like it's bare bones. I wanted to really push myself to use different materials and to, you know, and use some materials that I'm familiar with, like wood. I use wood stretcher frames that I, you know, take apart from canvases. Like as I mentioned earlier, like I often repurpose old paintings or old pieces for new pieces. So one process that's been sort of a mainstay in my work lately has been taking old paintings and ripping them off the canvases, the stretcher frames, and then like using the stretcher frames to build things. So this is like a tall ladder. This piece is actually called Dissension. And I painted the wood, and I also dyed the wood that's on the bottom to be able to create this piece. There's a little bit of faux grass in it as well. And this is, yeah, a continuation piece of the Bloodline series. So on that note, we can move on to the next piece. So this was one of my first ventures into repurposing paintings. You can see this little painting inside of it. This piece is called The Catch. The reason I included this piece is because it really kind of set the tone for the trajectory of a lot of my recent work. The previous pieces that you saw were created this year, and this piece was actually created in, this was created last year. So using a lot of different materials, building an entire cage-like structure out of wooden canvas armature. And also, I used lots of natural dyes to be able to create this object that's caged and against the wall there. This piece, just in a lot of ways, for me, represents sort of the new direction of my work in a lot of ways. This kind of pioneered like a lot of new perspectives for me. On that note, you can move on to the next image. This is another piece from around that era. This is from last year. This piece is called Free Spirit. I included this image because I think it brings a different element, a different energy from some of the other pieces that I've included. And I just wanted it to, add that flavor that I think some of my other work also has. And, but I didn't necessarily focus on this year. So that's why I included this piece in. And this piece is actually made of stuffed socks and bike seat and a bunch of other objects that I had lying around the house, basically. So yeah, this is actually one of my personal favorites. So I think I'm also partial to include it for that reason. We could also move on to the next piece. Oh, I guess that was all of it. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dario. You're getting some positive reinforcement from the chat as well. So in your artist statement, you talk about your pieces being like altar places or places of veneration, or just like to connect to that sense of like what is beyond just the physical world, right? And in a not necessarily like, you know, religious sense per se, but So would you say that these pieces are still in that vein, or um,
I would say some of them are. I think that the sanctuary-like experiences that I like to have people experience and participate in are in the newer pieces, which were the first four pieces that I showed. Um, but I do think that they're more kind of verging on effigy in some ways, which is another part of my work. Um, I think sanctuaries are more kind of for honoring objects and or honoring whatever it is that you revere. Sometimes, with the use of objects or other things that in some way symbolically like add meaning to whatever it is, the shrine, the sanctuary space. But I think some of my feelings during COVID quarantine haven't really been as reverential as they were. So I think that in a lot of ways I was kind of veering more on uh, effigy sculpture for those, which are usually erected and created to kind of take notice of their existence and then burn or in some way discard, degrade, and hopefully, set a tone for a new path, new beginning.
Wow, yeah. Great. Let's see, we have, okay, let me take a question from the audience first. It seems there are elements of Afrofuturism in the Bloodline series. Is that a movement that resonates with you in general?
Actually, so there's a book that I read called Homo Deus by Yuval Harari, and it's about like he has two books actually. Sapiens is about like the history of humanity up until this point, and he's a historian, so he speaks about that. But then his second book almost gets a little bit sci-fi, where he has some predictions for where humanity is going in terms of human upgrading and the class divide. And as the rich keep getting richer, they're going to start wanting to do whatever they can to live forever. So they'll keep upgrading their body and more or less turn into like human cyborgs or something along those lines. And, all of the, everyone below that class, a lot of people of color and things, that being a factor in the Bloodline series as well. I think that book influenced me to create this myth. And also, because you'll see in later pieces, some of which I'm still working on, that there are human upgraded individuals who are kind of taking the Earth Mother down from her grace. So in a lot of ways, I would say that it is sort of verging on Afrofuturism, this particular series.
Interesting. Will we be able to see the work at Governor's Island at some point? Or?
It's not looking like no one is around in the building except for the artists in residence.
Okay.
And it seems like next year would be the actual art opening for it. But we may also have to do a Zoom version of that art exhibition, depending on how things are. But you can see the progress of the work, and you can see photos of the images, photos of the work so far on my Instagram page at DarioMoore_art, or you can find it on my website at DarioMoore.com.
Got it. Yeah, I guess in this age of like virtual everything, it's like the experience is for you, but then like documentation is that much more important.
It really is.
Yeah. We got one last quick question from Angela. How do you maintain your work? Do you worry about their longevity and preservation?
Honestly, I don't worry too much about the longevity of it because I have so much of it stuffed in my shed that I just it's there, so it's sort of protected, but at the same time, things have happened to my work along the way, and I've got so much other work, and I've got so many new materials that I found objects and things that I can always make new pieces out of. I'm not really too attached to my work after I create them, but it's nice to have them to be able to recycle for.
Right, that being part of your practice, right?
Exactly. It's nice to have, but I'm not super attached to them, to be honest.
To break it apart, yeah.
Yeah, I'm always ready to break it apart.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.